Hello, Peter.
2 minutes early, making up for yesterday.
Yes, yes. I think it's always because whenever you're frightened, it's that something's going to go wrong. It's a kind of real hurry up and wait type situation.
Particularly for people like us.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I'm much more comfortable in the library stacks than I am with the keyboard in front of me.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah,
myself.
Yes. And something's always going to go wrong. You know, there's about 50 different things that go wrong. So anyway, let's then begin nice and early. So how are you, Peter?
Well, to be really honest with you, kind of still digesting the magnitude of the verdict in the Rittenhouse case, because it's not just about Kyle. I'm glad that the jury came to that conclusion. It was the only one they could remotely come to. Yeah. You know, you and I are not lawyers, but I mean, we've watched enough trials, high-profile ones. I mean, I was a Perry Mason addict. Okay, I mean, you know what I mean.
Yes.
And just to watch this prosecutor fumble and bumble like a clown. I mean, I don't have a JD. I mean, what you just said is wrong. I mean, how could it was breathtaking, the malpractice.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, it's staggering incompetence, but to be fair, I think that they never had a case. I think that the case should never have been brought, and they went with the best that they had. I mean, these were their only witnesses, so they ultimately had little choice in the matter. And so it so turned out that their own witnesses undermined their case, but they didn't really have anyone because if they had brought the other guy, the kicker, the guy who was kicking him in the head, I mean, it would have been even worse for them. So they were stuck with the case. That, this is what happens when you bring a case for political reasons rather than for any judicial reasons. And so they were like, I mean, it's kind of similar to the Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case, where again, the prosecutors really didn't want to go with that case, but enormous pressure was exerted against them, including from Barack Obama. And so they went with the case, and they kind of knew that they were going to lose, and they did lose. So, there was clear self-defense there.
If you were watching it live in real time, what was becoming patently obvious is that there were two different cases in this trial. There was the prosecution case. There was just a complete invention. Yes. And then, I mean, the self goals that were committed every step of the way. I mean, the defense are just saying, I mean, are you working for us now?
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, the defense themselves really didn't do such a great job.
Nope, they didn't.
And that's right. So all the attorneys who criticized it, I think they were absolutely right. I mean, Dershowitz was very critical of their performance, and others as well, like our friend Robert Barnes was very critical. Almost all of the attorneys who were commenting on this said, hey, they're not doing Kyle Rittenhouse any good, but because the case was so weak, that they nonetheless prevailed. I mean, that's why I was a little pessimistic and thinking that, oh, maybe, they didn't do such a great job. And the jurors are afraid, then they're going to come to some kind of a compromise. They'll try and find him guilty of something, if not the most serious charges. But in the end, I guess the sensible voices prevailed. So yeah, go.
It seems to me, I mean, we don't know, because, and hopefully we might find out. I mean, I think it's very interesting. The judge said, you don't have to tell anybody what happened. I mean, you just keep it. It's up to you. It's okay.
Yeah, but I'm sure there's some of them are going to give in to TV and everything. Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is that in hindsight, the jurors, they would say, all right. I think they came to across the board not guilty very quickly. But then I think some of them said, look, this is such an important case. Let's go through it again. Yes. And actually, I think it was the reverse. How would you, okay, we all believe that all these charges are nonsense. Maybe this whole trial was nonsense and a waste of our time. But let's be counterintuitive. Let's take the other guy's argument. And I think they argued it, they said it still doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think that, and there may have been a couple of holdouts. I mean, it's possible that that foreperson was a holdout. I mean, it was kind of odd for them on that after 3 days, and they said, "Can I take the jury instructions home?" And so they were going to sit there studying the jury instructions. I don't know, searching the internet for the meaning of all these different terms. I don't know why they, after all this time, why they needed to read them all, the instructions all over again. But I don't know. I mean, presumably they came back after, you know, doing their homework, and they still said, "Look, I mean, there's just nothing we can do. We can't. You know, it's obvious. You know, this is a case of self-defense." So, so that, you know, that was it. But I think it is interesting how the media have gone overboard with all of this. They have absolutely gone crazy, and still talking in this ridiculous way about, oh, a white man, you know, gets off under our system. Well, let me see now. Derek Chauvin was convicted. That was 2 months ago. I can't, you know, it was quite recently. You know, I don't know. It doesn't look to me like white men get off in the system. It's just, but they've attempted to racialize this, and to a certain extent, it did succeed. I mean, it was a case that the Independent of London, which is supposedly a respectable newspaper, one of the broadsheets, you know, had that headline: "Rittenhouse acquitted of murdering 2 black men." I mean, so I mean, that was, you know, no question. People really believe this: a Rittenhouse shot 2 black men.
Well, again, you know, I said, you know, when you were watching the courtroom proceedings, there were 2 trials going on. But there was a completely different trial in media as well, as you just said. Right. Okay. I mean, I don't know the source, but I think up to 80% of people that just had a cursory, casual, you know, it was a headline, you know, the radio, you're tuning on radio, listening in your car, and a truly extraordinary number of people thought it was a racially driven case, and it wasn't. Okay. You got a super chat there.
No, I think people are raising this point, which is that why this this meme of which is a very good, this interesting, the meme of the crossed state lines. I mean, everyone kept repeating this, but he crossed state lines. Well, you know, he's all of 20 minutes from Kenosha, you know, and basically, you know, the United States, it's perfectly legal to cross state lines. I mean, many people do this every day when they go to work. You know, they cross state lines, and then they come back home and they again cross state lines. But there's a speculation here that people somehow want the feds to get involved, and that if they can get the feds involved, I think it's, I don't know. I mean, you know, and knowing Merrick Garland, I think he's going to look hard as to how the feds can get involved. It's going to be a little difficult because he shot 2 white men. I don't quite get how they can make this into a civil rights issue. I think.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, pedophiles have rights too, I guess. All right. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's going to be hard. I mean, just on this crossing straight line, almost everybody that works in Washington, D.C. crosses state lines going.
I mean,
also, don't you find it just hilarious? Is that there's something called a border? That's a line too, but you don't care about the border.
You don't care about. No.
This is also, if we can, you know, kind of, we can broaden out to our expertise here, is up until 2014, people were going across the Russian-Ukrainian border every day. I mean, it wasn't an international border for them because they had to go to work and they went back home and vice versa. And all of a sudden, it's an important line, okay? But the southern border thing, this is what gets me the most, is that you care about, you know, the lines next to Kenosha, but you don't care about the entire Rio Grande, do you?
I know, yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, there's a similarity, and the analogy is a pretty good one, which is the way the Western governments treated the internal administrative boundaries, both in Yugoslavia and in the Soviet Union. Those were sacrosanct, absolutely sacrosanct. Well, those you can't change. But the international frontiers of Yugoslavia, oh, that's fine. You know, Croatia wants to secede, great. Slovenia secede, great, wonderful. You know, same with the Soviet Union. So no one cares about that. The international frontiers that were guaranteed at Helsinki, the UN Charter, and so on and so forth. But these administrative boundaries set up by communist governments, you know, completely arbitrary way. Oh, those are sacrosanct. Those you can't mess with those. So there is a similarity here. So international frontier, anyone should be able to walk in. You don't even need to take a COVID test to walk in. But just going back to this issue of the whether the feds can get involved. I mean, I have heard a theory how the feds could get involved, which is that they could try to get him on that he was motivated by disrupting a civil rights demonstration, and that if they can try and prove that he really hated the civil rights movement and he hated the civil rights workers, that he went to Kenosha in order to interrupt the civil rights demonstration. I don't know. I just heard that as a theory as how the feds could get involved.
Then this means this guy, for a 17-year-old, he's a pretty sneaky guy because he was cleaning graffiti. And his secret mission was, I mean, are we going to go down another rabbit hole with these people?
Right.
I think that particularly the Civil Rights Unit will take a look at it, but they're going to be on really thin ice. Okay.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, the more people learn about this, I mean, if you want to have an open mind, which is asking a lot of people these days, but if you have an open mind, you're going to say, yeah, this guy, he never should have gone to trial in the first place. I mean, Jimmy Dore has a gentleman, I think it was before the verdict, and he put together a montage of all the known videos. It is overwhelming. If you show that, say, yeah, they were chasing him. He wasn't chasing anybody.
That's right.
He was after the shootings. He ran to the police with his arms up in the air. I need to tell the police what happened. Okay,
that's right.
I mean, it's thin ice here. But then again, the way the media treated the whole thing, it's really extraordinary. I mean, you and I, I have to be honest with you, you and I didn't put this story under a microscope. I mean, when we looked at it and just thought, well, this is going to be another politicized trial. I learned over the last week or so, I learned a lot of details that I didn't know of. For example, he was driven across state lines. The gun was never across straight lines. Okay, I mean, the more they harp on their points, the more they're just meaningless. The state lines means nothing in this story. Nothing.
And if this is a kid from Kenosha, I mean, his family lived in Kenosha. He himself lived in Kenosha for a number of years as a child. So there was nothing at all special about that. And he was basically hired. He wanted to make a few bucks. Guarding the used car lot. So that's what he went there for. So there was always this sort of, as soon as he crossed state lines in order to. I mean, I think that the problem for the feds is that they don't want to lose a case. I mean, if you've already lost at the state level and now you're going to lose at the federal level, you're kind of looking really silly. So they're going to have to weigh whether they were. But there's another. Yeah, we're going.
I was going to say, I mean, this would be civil, okay? This would be a civil case, most likely. I mean, look,
I think it'd be a criminal case. I mean,
well,
they could. I mean, the families could sue him as a civil.
My point is, if they do it civilly, is that OJ had resources, okay, and he hid a lot of them, and he moved.
He never paid anything. I think he never paid anything. Yeah.
But my point is that after the criminal trial, they went after his wealth, okay,
right.
And he was better at moving that around than telling the truth about what happened to his ex-wife.
Right. No, that's right. Yeah.
But my point is here. So you want to sue Kyle? Okay, go ahead. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting for me in this whole trial is that, and there's you and I. We can take the media paradigm and turn it upside down. Kyle Rittenhouse was akin to the January 6 rioters.
Right.
Okay, let's take that. Let's take that on board, George. You and I can say, yeah, you're punching down at some of the poorest, weakest people in society. That's the parallel. That's the parallel right there. Okay.
Right. No, that's right. That's right. What's interesting though is the media reaction, which was furious. But I think one of the reasons why I think it was furious is that the liberal media have had a succession of victories in these legal proceedings because the Chauvin case was a nice victory for them. They managed to get convictions, however ridiculous, the convictions for almost all of Trump's people. Whether it was Manafort, Roger Stone, Flynn, and the Flynn case just went on and on and on. And then in terms of the payback, trying to get some of the Russiagate leaders, that hasn't really so far, panned out to anything very much. I mean, this guy, Kleinsmith, he got a tap on the wrist and he's going to be able to practice law. He didn't even get disbarred, so he's going to be able to practice law. So I think they were feeling very cocky that, well, we're going to win another one. Like in this Arbery case, it looks like they're going to win the Arbery case as well. It doesn't look like they're going to be, there's any real good defense for those two, the father and son, and the killing of Arbery. So that looks like another kind of victory for the liberal media. But this one was definitely a defeat, which is why they're just raging at this. The media just absolutely, this is a victory for white men. Absolute kind of nonsense. But they have to dress it up as somehow, the judicial system is biased towards white men.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably the saddest element of this whole thing, is that they're looking for a political, ideological victory. I mean, again, you and I we part with people like that. I mean, we don't even get close to that. I mean, I was just looking at the fate of this one individual, because that's how the law is built. It's one person put on trial and in front of a jury of his peers or her peers. And it worked. See, nobody wants to admit it worked.
Right. No, but that's a very interesting thing, because, of course, it worked. And then the would-be judicial reformers like Cuomo and de Blasio, who only yesterday said, hey, we gotta end the prison industrial complex. We gotta sort of release people. We gotta stop all this. Suddenly, hey, somebody was acquitted. What? We not acquitted? That's not, we need to lock them up and throw away the key. So all the talk about judicial reform, penal reform, and all the talk about how we need to be release people from prison. Oh, no, sorry, didn't really mean it. We don't like certain people getting acquitted. So all of this is such absolute bad faith that all the great judicial reformers suddenly become lock them up and throw away the key crowd.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're a white man,
right.
You're white, okay. I mean, the extent and the depths that they went to racialize this. These people are the most divisive in our society. It's really it's breathtaking how far they want to take this here. I mean, that the race merchant Reed over there. I mean, oh my God. I mean, I don't know. I guess you just have to be. See, you and I are not like those people. I can't. That's unwatchable to me. I mean, it just this is. She's a parody of herself now.
Yeah. I can't watch it. I mean, I know there are people who watch it who don't like her, but who watch her. But I can't do it. It's just so disgusting. To me, it's just disgusting. I mean, people who peddle this race hatred. Which not just is divisive, it's actually incendiary, because people are watching this and they're getting worked up. So particularly they're very American society is racist. And I got to go do something about it. So it's entirely kind of a cynical, incendiary thing. I mean, Sharpton did this all the time, and he was always a kind of a racial arsonist. I mean, a number of cases, it did lead to violence, but then Sharpton was, I was just expressing my views, even though essentially you were just a race baiter. You're getting the crowds worked up, and then somebody is going to go and do something like set fire to a store. Sharpton blazed the trail, and now Reed is in the business of doing so. It really is a look. I mean, what a disgusting person she is. You remember the homophobic messages? Oh, I didn't write those. It was somebody forged them. They went back in time and faked these homophobic messages. Still haven't cracked that one. Who was it who did it?
Remember? The Russians did it.
Oh yeah, exactly. They went back in time and inserted all those homophobic messages.
No, I mean and you and I are going to talk about this tomorrow on Crosstalk. I mean, this is kind of a prelude to what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But I mean, this is just a one in a long string of weapons of mass destruction,
Yes, exactly.
YOLO cake, all of Watergate. I'm sorry, Russiagate.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go on. We could talk hours about it. Okay.
Right.
I mean, there's no reason to believe the mainstream. There's no reason to believe the mainstream media is right about anything anymore.
No, not.
I mean, you and I have known this for a long time, but this one takes the cake. Okay.
No, I agree. I don't think exactly. Because I mean, always, there were very few people, unless you had a tiny group of people who were following the Rittenhouse case. A tiny group of people. Almost everybody in the country wasn't following it, and now they sort of find out about this. And again, that is clear case of the media manipulation, and this goes on all of these issues. Look. The Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case was also entirely manipulated. Most people had no idea. Again, the media's, Zimmerman was just, again, this white vigilante, went after this, innocent black kid and just shot him dead. I mean, so, the media do a disastrous job. And then, of course, we can talk about, how cynically they used Russiagate and so on, and all the rest, the Russian bounty stories, and then again, we can just go talk forever about all the ways the media do it. So, Trump had a point when he said that they are the enemies of the people.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. The liberal media is an enemy of the people. Full stop. There's nothing about that sentence that I have a problem with whatsoever. And this case proves it. This case proves it more than anything else. So look, Ukraine Gate. I can remember doing a crosstalk on it. And there was a liberal guest, and I just said, I studied Eastern European and Russian politics for a long time. It's not a part of the world that's alien to me, but I read the readout. Right. I don't get what the problem is here. Right. And the two conservatives on the program, they just broke out in laughter. I said, I mean, can you explain to me why this is such a big deal? It's Trump being boastful, talking about himself. That's what he always does. So what?
That's right. That's it. Yeah. That's right. And immediately, again, like the media go into their boom, they're only suddenly in lockstep. Trump was seeking to get Ukraine to interfere in the US elections. And then I didn't read any of that. I mean, you just tell me about what the Bidens were up to in Ukraine, which any U.S. president should want to know about. I mean, in fact, the American people should want to know about what the Bidens were doing in Ukraine, or indeed what the Bidens are doing in their dealings with China. Why are the Chinese paying Hunter Biden these exorbitant sums of money? We know the Chinese are not, they don't shell out money. They're very tight with their money.
They're investment savvy.
Exactly.
People.
So for them to be shelling out, however much it was for Hunter Biden, they had to be getting something pretty big for that.
Well, also we're going back in time. Quid pro quo. I'm willing to bet, George, as long as they have readouts, I think probably we could go back to Kennedy, maybe even Eisenhower. Who knows? Maybe in the archives.
Right.
George, all of those conversations are quid pro quos, every single one of them. That's why you have the cult in the first place.
Right, exactly. Of course,
there's nothing new about it. That is how it works, everyone.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course. I mean, if you're giving something, particularly in the case of Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is a supplicant state. It's a supplicant state. It comes there with its, hand out. Here, put something in there. It's begging bowl. It wants something. So if the U.S. agrees, to give them something, put something into their hands, It's going to want something in return. But no, I mean, all those Fiona Hills and others. No, we're just going to give them because, you know, Ukraine deserves all this money because they are fighting the Russians over there so that we don't have to fight the Russians over here. That was that. I mean,
that's just like the trial that just ended here. The same level of just comic, whimsical nonsense. Okay.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
So who do we have listening?
Well, we have a number of people. We have Herman Montoya, who says a good friend, the liberal corporate media and American politicians are enemies of the people. They rather divide against race and ideology. Yeah, I mean, I think that's I think true. I mean, I think the nexus between the liberal corporate media, the Democratic Party, the giant corporations, and the internet giants. I mean, it's a very firm nexus. I mean, it's a very formidable power, as we saw in the last election. So when they're united, it's quite hard to resist. That's why this jury victory was such a sensation, because it really just broke through you know, these powerful forces.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, and I think that I would criticize the judge and also the Rittenhouse's defense, saying, I mean, why isn't the jury sequestered? Because they're hearing everything. I mean, can we take the instructions home? I mean, having internet access. I mean, you know, and so again, it's one of these rare moments that you actually, I think maybe it's the first time in a long time, George, you and I can say, well, something finally worked the way it was supposed to work.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Because
and if I could just add here, you know, I don't know the profile of the jury, but I'm willing to guess these are predominantly blue-collar workers. I think that's a fair guess, considering the town and the geographical location of Kenosha. You know, they saw through all of this, and I'm really quite proud of them. Right. Okay, because they didn't cower. I mean, it's rare. I hate to say this, but it's rare to see courage, because it's so easy to cower and to say, I don't want to be held responsible for what happens next. Okay, right. These people took the instructions seriously. They took their membership of this jury seriously. I mean, you know, when you and I were coming up, that was par for the course. You did your civic duty, okay? Right. And now, you know, against all the odds, against all of the media, the crowds, and all of this, they said, nope. I didn't see that.
I think that's a good point. What I'm surprised at is that there wasn't a juror, or maybe a couple of jurors, who were determined to get onto that jury. Just as in the Chauvin case, we found out there were people who were determined to do it, and they lied about their previous activities and so on, just in order to get on this jury, because they were so determined to convict Chauvin. Same thing happened with the Roger Stone case. You remember we found out that the foreperson was actually an anti-Trump activist. The question then arises, how did the Roger Stone's attorneys miss that? I mean, you know, you hire presumably these killer attorneys who charge whatever it is, $500 an hour, and they miss that. I mean, it's like, what the hell are you paying all this money for?
But this is a pattern, and you and I have talked about it so many times. Okay, obviously, in the Rittenhouse case, the prosecution was just simply incompetent. I mean, completely. The defense didn't do a very good job. And we look at these other trials, you know, like with Roger Stone. I mean, these people are supposed to be impressive. Right. They're not.
No, they're not.
We see this over and over again. Right. This is not the way it's supposed to work.
I mean, that's what I find. Yeah.
We see it everywhere.
Right. I agree. I mean, it's amazing. And we saw this in the case of Manafort again, you know, very unimpressive legal presentation. We saw in the case of Flynn. I mean, they led Flynn to absolute disaster in getting him to plead guilty. You know, when clearly these lawyers had a conflict of interest. They had essentially filled in a form on behalf of Flynn, the Foreign Alien Registration Act form. They did it, and now Flynn was facing criminal charges out of that. So they were obviously conflicted in this, and they're the ones who persuaded Flynn to plead guilty. I mean, they were terrible representation. I mean, Flynn had to fire them. But that's the amazing thing, because these are people who charge a pretty penny. I mean, the Flynn's attorneys, there's this Covington and Burling, one of the big DC law firms, and that's the quality of the advice. I just find this amazing. I mean, again, going back to the Roger Stone case, if you're doing the voir dire and you're making your jury selection, the minimum you would expect is you actually do check up on these jurors. So if a juror says, "Oh, I'm pretty fair-minded, I don't have any strong views on Donald Trump," and then hey, you've got all these Facebook posts or Twitter posts on Donald Trump and about Roger Stone. You think they might have at least done a minimum of homework to find this out.
Yeah, and you don't really need you don't even need a paralegal to do that. You just have to go online. I mean,
go online, exactly. that's exactly. Just go online. I mean, everybody immediately, you go online to check up on, and the person you meet, you say, "Oh, let me know who is this person." I mean, but the idea these are lawyers and who just miss this. And then, of course, once the conviction is in, it is immensely difficult to overturn it. And they did try to challenge it, but then it was already too late to challenge her qualification.
It just seems to be pervasive everywhere. I mean, when did this happen?
Right.
I mean, you look at the current administration. I mean, there's no shining star there. None. Zero.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, to make this point here, everyone, past presidents kind of pushed, when someone's coming up and they're doing a good job and they're, like people are catching my eye, you push them aside. No, you got to stay focused on the big guy, okay? But there's nobody in this administration. None of them. No shining stars. No, they're not even eloquent. And when they speak, they either speak nonsense or they spoke in wokeism, which I need a translator for. I don't think you even need a translator because it's just gobbledygook, okay?
Right.
And then, Harris, Vice President Harris says, we need a more equitable outcome. Well, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Like everybody has to be a little guilty. Everyone's a little victim. What does that mean?
She's a classic case of absolute gibberish. I don't know if you saw they had a clip. I think it was on Ingram when she was doing the funny thing with that guy. She does those funny things.
Raymond, yeah.
And they had a clip of her saying something like, "We must realize where we are, and then consider where we're going, and then we have to determine how we're going to get there once we know where the important paradigm shift are going to be." And it was absolute. This went on and on. This absolute gobbledygook. I mean, it's like somebody just obviously has no idea what you're saying. You're just eating up time.
That's graduate student talk after 15 shots. Okay. That's what happens. Okay.
I guess so. But again, she has a big staff. And you think, well, why do you have a big staff? Well, a big staff, actually, they can, present you with talking points. They can present you with notes to make remarks. If she comes on and just, all you're really doing is eating up time. It's like when you don't have anything to say, you're just like, I need to keep talking for 5 minutes. And I have no idea what I'm saying. So I'm just going to keep talking for 5 minutes.
Or just do what Joe does. Have a piece of paper in your pocket. Hang on. Okay, I got it.
It is kind of an interesting. I mean, something that we have talked about. Is that the Democrats are now in a real bind. I mean, they have this very elderly man who is just obviously decrepit, and then they have a vice president who is intensely disliked, very, very unpopular. Now, at what point does Barack Obama and the people who are big within the Democratic Party, I don't know who they are, like Clyburn, Pelosi, Steny Hoyer. At what point do they get together and say, we need to do something because we are facing absolute annihilation at every level in the United States, not just midterms, but in all the state houses and everything. I mean, this is an absolute catastrophe that we're facing. So I wonder at what point do they move in like that?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because we go back to the verdict, is that if the feds want to pursue this, they should do it at their own peril, because there's a lot of things out there that you and I can talk about, which we think is really important, but we have to be honest, many of those issues don't touch people on a daily basis. But if they want to go down this rabbit hole to keep going after Rittenhouse, it's just only going to remind people why they hate the Democrats so much. Okay?
I agree.
And so they do it at their peril. If they want to go down this path and go, in spring and summer, they put, filing charges, and they're just going to bring it right back front and center. And people are going to say, hey, there was a verdict. The jury said what they wanted to say. They gave it. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They gave a verdict based on the evidence provided to them. The prosecution did a shit job. Okay, and you want to remind people that, and as this transitory inflation is still transitory. You really want to do that?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that it's going to be an absolute disaster to try to go down that path. And I think that's if they want to shuffle the deck and somehow bring in some new fresh face which might appeal to the public, I really don't know what they have, because even when we're talking about John Kerry, that is not a fresh face, and people had a chance to select John Kerry, and they said thanks but no thanks. So bringing him in, and now it would already be 18 years since they said no to John Kerry, so he's already that much older. It's not an attractive thing. Now, I do think that they might try to push Pete Buttigieg into that position. I agree with you, but at least they'll have, that's at least a young, fresh, pleasant-looking face.
I'm glad you brought it up, because a friend of mine, which will remain nameless, a friend of mine watched the Netflix docu love story with Mayor Pete. She watched it, as she said to me, I watched it so you don't have to, which I'm very grateful. Okay, it's awful. No matter what the director, no matter what the executive producer wanted to do, they couldn't inject life into this guy. He he is what he is. Okay, he's a complete fake. Yes. There's no authenticity to him. No. You know what the nail that really destroys him is his interaction with his spouse. This, Buttigieg is just like a wet towel. I mean, his spouse is reaching out, give me some emotion, something. And he can't. I mean, irrespective of who you think about his relationship, I mean, here's the guy that he married, the guy that says he loves and they have children with, and he can't be bestirred to show any emotion whatsoever. It's so weird.
Right. No, but it is, I mean, obviously, if you look at his career, there were obviously powerful forces that were propelling him. I mean, you don't just go from a mayor of a small town in Indiana to be running for president. It just doesn't happen that way. I mean, there are obviously people who make a decision to push you. I mean, it's a little like Emmanuel Macron. I mean, it's like, how does somebody who no one's ever heard of suddenly it becomes president? So obviously there were powerful forces pushing him. And
Barack Obama
again, that's right. But so again, he's obviously going to have people pushing him, but you're right, he doesn't have any kind of an appeal, and again, leave aside, I think, his personal life, which I think is very problematic in the United States. I mean, I think in Denmark or some small Northern European countries, they'll say, fine, we don't care, we can have a prime minister, married to a guy, we don't care. You can't do it in the United States. I think it's not. America just isn't there. I mean, it's just not the way Americans see themselves.
they've given up on kind of a organic type of person, because all of these are just media constructs, all of them. I mean, Kamala Harris is a perfect example of that.
Right.
I mean, she's completely unlikable, okay?
Right.
She's been unlikable her whole life, okay? You can't force people to like people, okay?
Oh, that's a very good point.
And then that is the problem they have. Donald Trump, for a lot of people, was so easy because he, as so many people have said to me, he spoke to me. That was good enough, okay? He wasn't a choir boy. Okay, he did a lot of stuff that a lot of conservatives would not be happy with at all, but he's an authentic person. See, the Democrats have an authenticity deficit in a huge way, because they always think it's the messaging and it's how we control the narrative and all. Yeah, that's politics. That's part of it. But I mean, if it's trying to, like, polish a stone, a gem. I mean, it has to be the real thing to get it there. Okay, if it's just fake. Yes. If it's just a piece of glass, it's always going to be a piece of glass.
Yep. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree, because the point about Trump was precisely that he had that authenticity. He's rough, he's crude, he's New York, not terribly likable. He doesn't have even that quality that politicians cultivate. The guy you want to go and have a pint with. He doesn't have that. He doesn't look like someone you want to spend a lot of time with.
And he doesn't demand that you like him. See, he doesn't care.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care. But it's also authentic. I mean, people say, okay, you get what you expected. I mean, that's what you get. And that is actually very refreshing when it comes to a politician, because he's not going out of his way to make himself likable. And that's very, it's very important. And the problem is with Harris, and of course, it was always the problem with Hillary Clinton, is that they're inauthentic. They're always trying to figure out what do you want to hear from me? What do you want me to say? And people can figure out. You don't have anything of your own to say. You're trying to figure out what you should say in order to please me, and that is really annoying.
It's like when she's going through her hand. Oh, I have some hot sauce here. And she's with African American. I have some hot sauce here. I mean, that is just pandering. I mean, but the interesting thing is when you talk about authenticity, Joe actually is kind of authentic, because when he called that Negro baseball player and then he called one of his colleagues boy, I mean, you see the real Joe. Joe's an old segregationist, okay? And when he's off guard, and when he's in the clouds, he reverts to himself, okay? He reverts to himself, because that's how he's thought almost his entire life. I mean, I don't think until the campaign, I don't even think he ever heard of the word equity, and now he says it all the time. Right. Yeah, I doubt he knows what that means.
Oh, I doubt it as well. I think that he's somebody who, again, goes with whichever way the wind is blowing. I mean, that's who he was. That's who he is. He just sees, that this is the way things are moving, so he goes in that direction. He was a neocon and a kind of new Democrat when that seemed to be the coming thing. Now he's going along with all the equity and so on. That he's what he is. I mean, it's like he has no beliefs in anything. I mean, he really doesn't believe anything other than his own, advancing his political career, which he's done very successfully.
You're describing, I don't know if anybody watching is going to know this. He's like Gumby.
Gumby. Anyway, we have a super chat from our good friend, Detroit Rock City. Thank you, Detroit. And he asks, do you guys think the US is itching for a small conflict? Okay, what do you think, Peter?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. George is an expert on the Balkans, and so I follow his lead. We do a lot of podcasts of what's going on in the former Yugoslavia. George is a preeminent expert on that. Both of us, follow Ukraine like it's in our blood. In Ukraine, with Belarus, and with the former Yugoslavia, they're itching for something. They need something. It's called, it's like a splendid little war, which never works out very well. But then again, it's the same people in charge.
That's it. No, I think that's a very. I think they are itching
in Taiwan. In Taiwan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but each of the small wars that you just named, I mean, I think in the Balkans, whether it's in Bosnia-Herzegovina or Kosovo or Ukraine and Belarus, these are likely to be quite big wars. You know, the golden
I said
age.
that sarcastically, meaning splendid little war.
Yeah, exactly. No, but that's the point. I mean, what they call the sort of small wars that they could wage in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War. So, like in Clinton's case, when he bombed Bosnia, and then of course he bombed Yugoslavia over Kosovo, and then you had George H.W. Bush, who invaded Panama. You can't do those things anymore. I mean, they could, of course, still invade Panama, but if you start messing around in Europe, you're already going to come up against Russia, and Russia just is not in the mood to make concessions to NATO. So if they tried anything like this in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I don't know how the Russians would respond, but they certainly would not roll over the way they did in the 1990s. So I think absolutely right. They need a foreign policy success, but it's going to be very hard to have a small conflict, one that isn't going to escalate and something get it quickly out of American control.
Well, and as was mentioned here, Belarus, Ukraine, the Balkans, and then we have Taiwan. Again, you're butting up against countries that can say absolutely no way. You will suffer severe consequences.
Right.
I mean,
right.
this isn't in the 1990s where it was in the unipolar moment. You can do whatever you want. You don't care about the consequences. They, for 20 years, they completely upended the Middle East. Okay. Right. And now therefore, I mean, whatever you think of the Taliban, George and I don't have a high opinion of them at all. But they're making overtures. The Russians are still keeping them very much at arm's length, but they're in dialogue, which I agree with. The Chinese, the same thing here. So I mean, the unipolar moment is over. See, this is the problem. This is a problem for people in the Biden administration, the Victoria Nulands, okay? Because there isn't a patch out there that you can turn into your playground. That's pretty much gone right now, okay?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, they could try something in some place like Ethiopia, where they're not going to butt up against the Russians. But it's a messy business in Ethiopia. Like, what's the payoff? You remember, I mean, Clinton, well, actually it started under George H.W. Bush, but it continued under Clinton when they intervened in Somalia. What did the United States gain from that? They didn't just lost all those lives in Mogadishu, and then Clinton had to withdraw, because what was the goal here? I mean, like they said, oh, we're going to come in and feed the hungry in Somalia. Then they certainly found themselves in a conflict with the local warlords, as was entirely foreseeable. Then they had 18 American servicemen were killed. Now where do we go? So they quickly withdraw. So Ethiopia is, I think, going to prove to be a very, very messy venture.
It's very, see, when it comes to places like Ethiopia, it's very difficult to find your Hitler, okay? Because that's what they always find their Hitler, okay? The next Hitler, all right? And in a conflict that's in Ethiopia, which is terribly, terribly complex, it's hard to get a peg, to hang your story on.
Right.
It just doesn't work that. But then, when it comes to Ukraine, oh, it's the Russians, and then, it's the Chinese, it's the CCC. That you can roll that out. They do roll it out all of the time, okay? Right. But bluster isn't met with actions here. And when there is pushback, they do get reassess, okay? Right. Because when it comes to, nobody in NATO wants to go to war with Russia. They want Russia to make mistakes. Yes. That's what they want. Okay, you want the Chinese to make mistakes.
Yes. No, I think that's unquestionable. That's the strategy in Ukraine. But that's always been the case. I mean, if you think back on the U.S. policy in Afghanistan during the Carter years, I mean, it was geared toward provoking Russia into making a mistake of going into Afghanistan. I mean, there was explicit goal pursued by Brzezinski and Gates, who was then the head of the CIA. That's what they were doing. They were trying to get them, and that's kind of what they're doing in Ukraine. I mean, they're kind of goading Russia into military intervention in Ukraine, and then boom, they've got it. And now they can mobilize the world against Russia. Now they can mobilize everyone into NATO. Russia will be become an outcast for a couple of generations. That's what they're doing, and I think you can see why the Russians are really very, very annoyed. They were doing this all the time in Yugoslavia, again, kind of egging on Milosevic to intervene, more forcefully in Kosovo, because ultimately, you're waging this damn guerrilla war here. We have to do something, but you always knew, well, if we do something, then of course that triggers NATO intervention. So this is classic of what America attempts to do.
Well, and if we go back to Bosnia Herzegovina, it's nothing really clear cut there. I mean, you're going to really have to gin up the propaganda machine, because there's a lot of people in Europe are saying, what you guys did in the 90s was a mistake. It's still a mistake, and you're perpetuating a mistake, and we don't want anything of it. So what that will do is it will divide NATO allies, okay? Not just European countries, NATO allies. So there's no real easy freebie out there. It doesn't mean they won't try. They look at the,
But I think that's the thing. I agree. I think they will try. And remember, even during the 90s, there was a lot of division in Europe. I mean, there was many of the smaller countries really thought that this is a crazy venture going into into Bosnia and Kosovo, but there was silence because they have the America has the clout, and of course the Americans. The British, they have the big guns in NATO, and everyone else had better shut up. Everything often hangs on Germany, but then Germany, of course, never really, decide not to decide. And unfortunately, in the case of Germany, there was an election, and then they brought in Schroeder. Schroeder didn't have any strong views on it, but he had that creep who was his foreign minister, that green guy, Joschka Fischer. And Fischer, he was a big one for humanitarian intervention, and that swung the NATO on behalf of humanitarian intervention.
If you want a good metaphor for Fischer, he's the type of guy that pulls the pin on the grenade and passes it. The grenade.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Exactly
I agree. I agree. But a total disaster for Germany.
Really awful, cynical man.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you know what? He got that veneer. Oh, he's green. He's green. He wrote that. He wrote that, okay?
Absolutely.
Oh, he must be a good guy. He must be a fuzzy, warm guy. He wasn't.
That's
okay?
right. He wasn't. He wasn't. Exactly. He was a green. And people remembered the Greens, hey, weren't they the peace guys? Wasn't he, aren't they for peace? It was a Petra Kelly. Remember she was the big green person back in the 80s. And of course, Fischer himself.
Under her eyes,
bags under her eyes, yeah. I actually thought she was kind of good looking, but
she was kind of quirky, neat. I liked her, yeah. With that accent too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But then Fischer had this reputation. He was a radical in the 60s, so he's bound to be against any kind of military intervention. Of course, no. They didn't really realize that those radicals had quickly, become neoconservatives and were gung-ho for all sorts of foreign intervention. So Fischer, was a large con job. And I don't think the Germans were that enthusiastic. They never are for military intervention. But with Fischer there, they went along with it.
Yeah. And he was just a prototype for the Greens of today. They're the most Russophobic in Europe.
Exactly.
Okay. German Green, leave me alone. Okay,
that's right. That's an amazing transformation. But they are indeed the most Russophobic. So depending on what role they're going to play in this government, I think the new German government, you can rely on it being a very Russophobic government. I mean,
if I go back to our previous podcast, because I think we really focused in on something we were talking about Macron, is that let the French do the politics, let the Germans do the policy. That's a way forward here.
No, that's right. But it's always it's always this problem. Europe. Because ultimately Europeans get a free ride. It's the old model, which is when you're hooked on welfare. If you're hooked on welfare, you're not. Basically you don't have any incentive to go out and earn a living. And I think that's the problem with Europe all the time, and that's how the Americans have played it all these years. Basically, hey, you want your nice welfare states, okay, you can have them, but while you're in NATO, we get to call all the shots. And I said, okay, that's fine, good. We don't have to spend anything on NATO. We'll have a nice little welfare state. You call all the shots. We won't interfere, except of course, suddenly, hey, your foreign policy is leading us to disaster. Then they kind of wake up, and then they quickly go back to sleep again.
Perfect. It's cyclical. It's
right.
Always, we must do something. We how many times in our lifetime, George? Oh, there must be a European army. I've heard that one. Oh my God. Okay.
Me too. Yeah. It's the oldest cliche in the book. It started already back, in the early 1950s. Remember the European defense community and all this. Yeah, we're going to have their own European army, and it's so tiresome. And then we had it in the 80s and in the 90s. I mean, we're going through this. Yeah, we'll have a more European dimension, and the Americans say, yeah, we're all for European dimension as long as it's within NATO. Yeah, absolutely. It's voluntary as long as you do as we say.
But that's the laziness of the mind. Okay, right. That's what we have. And George and I made it very clear. Europe is just turning itself to being irrelevant. It's just simply irrelevant. Okay, and during a time of great power competition, that's not the place you want to be. Right. They have the intellectual resources. They have the educated population. They have a high standard of living. They have everything you need, and they just can't put it together. They can't connect it. Okay, and the Americans love that. Oh, yeah.
That's right. That's right. So because and they occasionally, like Trump, come along and say, "Hey, you're not pulling your weight. You're not spending enough," and so on. But ultimately, it always settles down. Hey, if you keep making these demands on the Europeans, they might think, hey, what do we need this NATO for? So it always, they always back down, and as Trump backed down and said, yeah, great. Now everyone is coughing up more money, and we're all on the same page.
They're not coughing up a whole lot more money.
No. But again, it's a hardy perennial with Americans complaining that the Europeans are not pulling their weight. They're not spending enough money. Hey, this rich country, Germany. I mean, what percentage of German GDP goes on defense? I don't know. It's
1.2%.
In itself is a kind of a joke.
Well, I mean, the German army is the closest thing you can get to a joke when it comes to the military. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it tells you how seriously they take it. They don't take it seriously. No. I mean, do you think anyone is afraid of the Dutch army? Really? I love Dutch people. I love Dutch people, and I hate Dutch people. I hate Dutch people because they speak like 80 languages. I mean, and they all speak it perfectly. It's really annoying. Yeah. Okay? They speak English better than most Americans.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that's generally always the annoying parts of the Europe. But particularly the Dutch, I agree. The Dutch in particular, the Germans also. I mean, I know there are some German holdouts who really don't speak English, but by and large, they speak English perfectly.
The holdout is the accent. That's what they do. Henry Kissinger did that. Henry Kissinger kept the accent. Okay.
Right. Yes.
I mean, I had a Hungarian professor. His name was Andrew C. János. I don't know if he's retired or not at Berkeley. Great Eastern Europeanist in The Politics of Backwardness in Europe, one of the greatest books I've ever read. It's really good. And he even told me, he said, Peter, you have to have an accent where people do not think they're getting their money's worth. It's true. I think it's true. I had plenty of Poles,
I think it's
Hungarians, Czechs. They all pulled the accent thing, and I liked it. Okay,
that's right. No, I agree. I mean, it was hilarious because here's this guy Kissinger, who was a very smart guy, and then he had a brother who also lived in the United States. His brother spoke exactly like an American. That's it. Without a trace of an accent. So Kissinger knew exactly, why somebody with his talent and abilities couldn't perfect his accent. No, I mean, he knew that's his selling point, the backward accent. I mean, how do you get people always to call him Dr. Kissinger? Dr. Kissinger, doctor. He had a PhD, like every other academic in the United States has a PhD. Well, Dr. Kissinger, what do you know?
But you know what the accent does? It actually initiates a reaction from the people listening. When you hear the accent, you lean in.
Right.
You want to understand it clearly.
Yes.
It's a trick. It's played all of the time.
That's right.
Okay, it's a way to lull people
Yes.
into conversation.
Yes, no, I think it's right. I mean, he had the accent. He also had that deep voice. And so when you combine the accent, the deep voice, and actually it was quite hard to understand. I mean, you're right. You had to lean in because he wasn't at all easy to understand what he was saying. But he had, people who were alive at that time, don't really, will find it hard to explain to people today just what an enormous reputation he had in his heyday. I mean, now he's a kind of a hated, reviled figure. No one respects him. But briefly, in that from 1972 through till about 1976, the world worshipped Kissinger. I mean, he was just a ubiquitous. Wherever there's anything going, there was Dr. Kissinger, and everyone just fawned on him.
There are people even at that time when Nixon resigned, and then we had Ford come on board. There were people making reference to the Nixon, Kissinger, Ford years. I remember hearing that.
That's it. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Exactly. And that's and when there was all the in the days or weeks leading up to Nixon's resignation, the world had to be reassured that Kissinger will nonetheless be staying on. I mean, that was the thing. Okay, Nixon can go, but is Kissinger staying on? Yes, so good. And Gerald Ford had to say, no. Kissinger, he's got a job here forever, So he had to reassure that. Oh, thank God, Kissinger will still be there.
And he was subpoenaed to testify. And I can remember the media is, he's not happy about this. He has nothing to do with Watergate, and they just treated him with kid gloves. It was like he came in, he sat down, they asked him 2 questions. Thank you, Dr. Kissinger. Thank you.
Right.
Sorry to bother you. I mean, they they trembled in front of him. Right. They trembled.
Right. They trembled in front of him. And there was that, remember the famous press conference in Salzburg? I can't remember, was it 74? When he threatened to resign. He did a kind of histrionic thing. He threatened to resign and boom, again, he just thought, imagine, I mean, to have that sort of ego that you threaten to resign and everyone is, oh my God, please don't resign. We need you.
The interesting thing was that it was Haldeman and Ehrlichman that were really wanting to push Kissinger out, okay? And the irony, of course, is that within the White House bubble, they were referred to as the Germans because they were names, okay? But the real German was Henry Kissinger, okay?
That's right.
And Kissinger was a brilliant bureaucratic infighter. I mean, of the, something like a Fauci of his time, okay? Because he knew how to maneuver, and at the end of the day, he watched a Nixon put a knife both Ehrlichman and Haldeman, and he was like a Cheshire cat. I mean, he was smiling. He's like, "I win, I won. You're gone."
Yeah, you're right. It was a so-called the Berlin Wall. Haldeman,
Berlin Wall.
Kissinger, and Ron Ziegler, who was the Nixon's press secretary. That was the Berlin Wall, and Kissinger also annoyed Nixon because whenever they had these big state banquets, Kissinger always insisted on being seated next to some young, attractive woman. And Nixon would just get so annoyed about this. For God's sake, how old is... Was it?
Joe St. John was
St. John, but that was a bit, Nixon saying, how old is this bloody guy? You're going to be seated next to some, young pretty girl.
Oh, remember the photographs? I mean, Kissinger's kind of a pudgy, small guy, and he just loved to have those tall blondes and brunettes. I mean, he didn't care that he looked silly, okay? Because he's got the goods. I got the goods. I may look silly, but I got the goods.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And it was in one of those biographies I remember reading some years ago. I think it was maybe Walter Isaacson. He said it was kind of strange, this transformation, because Kissinger had actually been in the Kennedy administration, and then the Kennedy crowd regarded him as kind of a ridiculous person. Precisely, he was a sort of pudgy, professorial with those thick glasses and, and everything. Whereas the Kennedy crowd, they were these sort of handsome, waspy guys, athletic looking, like McNamara, Bundy, they were the good looking guys. And for them, Kissinger was just sort of kind of a ridiculous, and as though Kissinger had kind of built a sort of inferiority complex being next to them, all of whom were much taller than he was. And as I say, in much better shape than he was. But so, he kind of compensated for that with that sudden, his emergence as the ladies' man in the Nixon administration.
What was interesting too is the transformation, because he was an acolyte of Nelson Rockefeller. Okay, right. You can see how he was an operator. An operator. Okay, and yeah. Nelson Rockefeller was the real deal at the time.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He was vice president. Okay,
that's right.
His demise is a different story. At least he died with a smile on his face. Okay.
I think because just in case people don't know about this, his demise. I think it was around 1978, somewhere around that time. I mean, he was caught essentially in flagrante with dead. He died of a heart attack while he's with his mistress. And the problem was that they tried to cover it up. And they didn't want to reveal the circumstances of his death, but it gradually dribbled out. And of course, once it dribbled out, he became a laughing stock. And so his demise, like that's what Peter said, his demise was kind of embarrassing precisely because they tried to deny it, and make it as if he died in his bed, surrounded by his family and so on.
No, he died in a desk chair with his trousers on the floor. Okay. Simple as that, folks. Okay.
Yes, exactly. I think that's
for a man his age. I mean, he gave it his best. Okay.
He gave it his best. I mean, it was sort of an interesting situation in which that that now he's sort of remembered for that. I mean, it's like it's for this undignified ending. It's like it's kind of one of the first things that people remember about him, which is strange. I mean, the guy was, I think, New York governor, 4 terms? I don't know how many terms he was the governor of New York, and he was vice president for 2 years with Gerald Ford.
It was the Rockefeller wing of the party.
Exactly. It was called the Rockefeller wing of the party for a reason. It was because he was the Rockefeller.
The interesting story, just for trivia, is when he was tapped to become vice president, his brothers were furious. They did not want him to take the job. Rockefellers are vice president of nothing. Okay. Yeah. Then their anger intensified because Nelson Rockefeller had to show his wealth and his family's wealth.
Yes.
And the Rockefellers were not happy about that. You know why? Because they had not nearly as much money as everybody thought they had. Okay. Yeah. To the credit of the descendants of John D. Rockefeller, one of the most reviled human beings in history, much akin to the tech titans of today, is that he ordered his descendants, if they wanted any of the money, they had to give the vast majority of it away. That was their job. His descendants were to give away his fortune. Okay. And so they still were rich, but I mean, not like gazillionaires like the Rockefeller brand. Which
right. But that's the thing, I mean, which is always puzzling about these billionaires, because they all say this. Like, as you say, Rockefeller, Rockefeller, Ford, and these days you've got Gates and Zuckerberg. They all say, well, we're giving it all away. All and every penny we're giving away to charity. And yet they seem to get richer and richer all the time. So, I mean, Rockefellers were not poor. I mean, I agree. Yes, obviously they overestimated their wealth, but nonetheless, they weren't poor. I mean, the philanthropy has always been a kind of a racket for the rich. I mean, it's basically, it's a very useful, it's a tax shelter, essentially. I mean, so you get the wonderful publicity, particularly if you have, very questionable sources of how you got the money. So you become, this great philanthropist, but it's also a tax dodge. I mean, that's that's why they all go in for this philanthropy. It's it's cheaper for them than to be taxed as for income. So, but you're right about the with the Rockefellers. Yeah, they're vice presidents of nothing. The problem that Gerald Ford faced was that the Republican Party absolutely hated by then the Rockefeller wing of the party. I mean, Rockefeller was very powerful, back in sort of in the 50s and around about 1960. That was still Rockefellers, they were powerful in the Republican Party. By 1972, 74, it was more or less more Reagan's party than Rockefeller's party. So Ford, it was a bad move for Ford's part because it really pissed off the Republican Party. You brought back Nelson Rockefeller. This is the guy who sabotaged Barry Goldwater's campaign in 64.
It's so interesting that you say that, because in 1974, it had already become a Reagan party, but nobody knew it except for the people that loved Ronald Reagan. It's kind of like when you're doing public polling. If you don't ask the right question, you'll never get the right answer. And that's exactly what happened in 74. It was already a Reagan party, but they didn't realize it was already a Reagan party. That's just a fascinating thing. Because
I agree.
We're looking at, Barry Goldwater as kind of a godfather. Okay, he lost disastrously, but he was a pure thinker. I remember the way he was worshipped, even in the 70s. Okay, and then the Rockefeller wing of the party. Okay, and both were an elite phenomenon, but coming in from the grassroots. It was Reagan country already in 74.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And Ford really did himself no favors in appointing Rockefeller. It guaranteed that he would be challenged for the nomination in 76. It was a very close run thing when it was challenged by Ronald Reagan, and that was after Ford had already dumped Rockefeller and had brought in Bob Dole, kind of the young Bob Dole, because Bob Dole was kind of Mr. Midwest, salt of the earth type, not like this awful WASP elitist New Yorker. But even so, I mean, it was a close run thing. But you could already see the fact that Ford barely was able to defeat Ronald Reagan, just showed how much the party had already moved away from.
But the fact that he took Rockefeller was the ascendancy in pure form of Reagan, because everybody, the smart money knew, is this Ford Rockefeller thing, it's dead in the water. Okay, you just postponed Ronald Reagan, but actually what it did was it was like a bowling ball taking down the pins. They're gone now, and there's only one man left standing.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It was, the funny thing was that in that 76 election, Bob Dole then was he spoke for that Republican isolationist, literally isolationist kind of wing of the party. I mean, he actually talked about the 100 years of Democrat wars. I mean, he brought that up in his speech at the Republican convention. He used that phrase, the 100 years of Democrat wars. Completely correct. And so they were Democrat wars. Korea, World War I, World War II, the war with Spain. I mean, these were Democrat wars. But then Dole, of course, became this arch interventionist and neocon, and never saw a defense budget that he didn't want to raise, and never saw a country he didn't want to bomb.
He had a secret marriage with Sam Nunn, I swear.
That's it. Yeah. So that was the transformation of Dole. He was a very unlikable politician. I don't know whether you remember him. I mean, he was a really unpleasant. I mean, he was authentic. I mean, he wasn't a phony in the way that Hillary Clinton is, but he was an unpleasant person.
There was a phrase attached to him: "Get off the grass." Remember, the angry old man, "Get off the grass." Okay,
that's right.
And I remember. I mean, public figures you're allowed to laugh at, but Bob Dole was injured during the Second World War, and very much like John McCain, he had a very, very bad arm.
I think his arm was pretty much useless. I don't think.
Yes, it was.
I don't know what is his right arm or whatever. I think he couldn't really do anything with it. Yeah.
He was on the campaign stump. He went up on this platform. It was really, really flimsy.
Right.
And he was a man that in the best of time had to be very careful of his balance because his body was out of whack.
Right.
And he fell right through it. And and of course, people say, this is the state of the Republican Party and all of that. Very bad optics for him, very unlikable. I mean,
Yes.
for people that liked him, he was the last of the real Americans. Okay, and he was a good person. Okay, as far as a politician is concerned, but you couldn't. He, for example, he just didn't understand how television worked. He didn't understand how he was being perceived and all of that, and it was those days, George, where, well, it's my turn. That's why he got it. It's my
That's
turn.
it. Yeah, that's right. It's my turn. Yes, he said it with that characteristic snarl. And then, of course, he's famously in the 1988 campaign when he turned against George H.W. Bush, and he said, "Quit lying about my record." But he said it in such a menacing way. It's like, there's a whoa. This is not a nice person. But it's very strange why he, who's basically a legislative figure, I mean, he's a Senate person, why he would think,
No Biden.
Yeah, but why he would think that he has any kind of a national following. I mean, traditionally, people who've just come from a legislative body, it doesn't translate into a kind of a national figure. In other words, an ability to make good speeches, an ability to glad hand ordinary people, and so on. I mean, this is somebody who just sat there in committees and assigned people to committees. I mean, he's just not a national figure. But for some reason, he became obsessed with the idea that he needs to become president.
That's one of the things about George Bush Sr. that I've always found very curious, because he just is such a non-figure when it comes, when you think of the people around.
Right.
I mean, the afterglow of Ronald Reagan, that certainly helped him a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
But again, no real national appeal.
No.
In our lifetime, let's face it, there's only, Nixon, he had a hardcore following. I mean, fanatical.
Right.
Fanatical. People don't realize that. My father was a fanatical Nixon guy.
Right.
Oh, I mean, anything. I mean, we would watch like CBS Evening News, and my father would just snarl all the time. That's not Dick. That's not Dick. Okay. And then Nixon had very hardcore support. Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. Those three Republicans in our lifetime. Everybody else is pocket change.
That's right. And it's funny that two of the three you just mentioned had staggering election victories. I mean, Nixon and Reagan both carried 49 states. So, Reagan obviously had a popular appeal. He knew how to appeal to crowds. He knew how to deliver a line and so on. But Nixon, you're absolutely right. Nixon had a devoted following, but Nixon also had a populist streak. I mean, I think that, that whole thing about taking on the elites, and the elites had no time for the common man, that was a permanent theme with him. I mean, even in his famous Chequers speech in 1952, when he saved his political career, he brought up the issue of Pat and her cloth coat. She doesn't wear mink and fur, she has a cloth coat. And he knew how to tap into, people's, class sensibilities. Yeah, Dick is like one of us, and they're picking on him, hey, this person who's actually very poor, he comes from a very poor background, and they're making him out as if he somehow stole money, and then, he's trying to enrich himself. It didn't look good. I mean, much like, again, punching down. You're going after somebody who's actually very poor and making him out to be a thief.
And he and Pat were given a dog named Checkers.
That's it.
And the same speech, he said, and we're not giving it back.
That's it.
Whoa, what about, man, he punched it he hit the ball out of the park, and we're not giving it back.
He hit the ball out of the park. He hit the ball because, Eisenhower was already getting ready to dump him, with that scandal. But that speech, and the response to that speech was so overwhelmingly positive that, Eisenhower kind of, had to, put his arm around, I'm right behind you. He wasn't actually right behind him, but because of that, the response to that speech. And again, a lot of people sneered at that speech. But it was actually a brilliant speech. I mean, all of that, with the checkers, the dog, Pat, and everything was, it was a masterful performance. But there was always that populist element to him. He speaks for ordinary people.
The interesting juxtaposition is that, everybody knows that Eisenhower is a Republican, but he wasn't not necessarily viewed as a Republican nationwide. He was Ike. He's one of those rare historical figures, just his nickname, Ike, okay? And he just cut across everything. I mean, Republican, Democrat, conservative, whatever, that's Ike. That's Ike, okay? And very few people in American history have been able to pull that off. And what we've already said is that Nixon, as vice president, he had a hardcore behind him. Okay, of course they liked Ike. That hardcore, of course, liked Ike. Okay, but Nixon was their guy. Okay, that's why he was given the VP, because he can move people. Okay, and you can say a lot of terrible things about Richard Nixon, which is fine. And most histories of Nixon are written by liberals, if not all of them. Okay. But Nixon was not afraid of work. He knew how to campaign. He campaigned during the wilderness years when a Republican needed help. Dick Nixon was there.
That's right. And
when you think Barack Obama does that?
That's right. And when you look at his record, this is somebody who was on 4 successful presidential tickets, and he almost certainly won the 1960 election. So you basically that's 5 presidential elections that he was on the winning side. That's, not everyone could pull that off. So
I don't want to scare anybody off watching this here. I mean, George and I are not Nixon fanatics. We're not. But what we are fanatical about is a more clear-eyed historical record. I mean, it's very easy to sneer at Nixon. Nixon made mistakes, and we can look at Cambodia and stuff like that. George and I are not going to argue against that.
Well, let's go back on that. I mean, if you look, Nixon inherited a war. I mean, you could say, the Eisenhower, the war was already ongoing during the Eisenhower years, but it was escalated in the Kennedy and Johnson. So when he inherited the war, I mean, it wasn't easy. Everyone sort of assumes, you can just get out of the war. I mean, people always say, Nixon could have just simply left in January 1969. Whoever does that? I mean, how can you use a standard to apply to him that you don't use to anyone else? How long did the United States stay on in Afghanistan? I mean, how long did the United States stay on in Iraq? I mean, it never happens that way, that you can just say, we're just going to leave in Vietnam.
Nixon's not given credit for ending the war. Okay, he did. Okay, how he did it.
But it took him some time.
There's a lot of things to talk about. There's a lot of things to talk about. But he did end it. Okay, and it took enormous political skill to do it. Okay,
right. No, I agree. Well, it took enormous skill, because what he did, and that was the skill of his foreign policy, so he kind of brought in the Soviet Union, and he brought in China. And therefore, in some ways, he kind of diminished the importance of Vietnam. He said, we're developing this new relationship with the Soviets and the Chinese, and this Indochina really isn't really that important. We really don't need to tear ourselves apart over this issue, which is a kind of a sideshow.
That's why we have the phrase, folks, and it's a great phrase. Nixon went to China. Okay, right. I don't. It's a phrase for younger people now.
Right.
But when Nixon did go to China, that was one of the biggest effing deals ever. Okay.
Right. It was because not only did he have an enormous his reputation, his fame. After all, he became famous for being an arch anti-communist. The guy who he nailed Alger Hiss when he was on the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he was the one. He pursued Alger Hiss. I mean, he through his cross-examination, which was again very effective. But Nixon was also part of that wing of the Republican Party, the Who Lost China wing, which is, hey, all these scummy State Department types, they lost China. We had China, we lost it. But yeah, that's right. Anyway, Herman Montoya says, interestingly, says, Ronald Reagan is the godfather of neoliberalism and libertarianism. That's why American politicians are anti-union, anti-worker, deregulation, and tax cuts. Nothing for working class people. You know, I think that there's something in that, because if you look at just look at the writings of, say, Kevin Phillips. You know, Kevin Phillips, always regarded as the sort of the doyen of Republican thinkers. Phillips always differentiated kind of Nixon republicanism from Reagan republicanism, you know, because Nixon republicanism was populist in intent. Reagan republicanism was for the rich. I mean, it really was. Tax cuts, anti-union, anti-worker, deregulation, and yeah, and as Herman says, you know, nothing for the working man.
Well, and the interesting thing is, who, at the end of the day, who was one of the greatest acolytes of Ronald Reagan? Bill Clinton.
That's right.
Transcended party.
That's right.
Transcended, those ideas transcended party.
Yes, that, you know, exactly. And ultimately, you know, we know what happened during the Reagan years. I mean, he made his mark as president when he fired the air traffic controllers. I mean, that was it. I mean, that was his defining moment. You know, he defined his presidency when he said, you know, that's it. You know, you don't show up for work, you're fired. And while that was certainly a courageous step, because, you know, if there had been a plane crash, you know, as a result, that would have been on him. But yeah, but basically it was anti-union. I mean, no question. It was a huge deunionization and therefore cuts in pay during the Reagan years.
See, that's one of the things that George and I like to differentiate, and I guess maybe we have to accent it here, is that when we talk about Ronald Reagan, it's not like we liked his policies. That's not the point. The point is, and what I stress a lot, is leadership skills. Okay, he was a leader. Okay. Like it or not,
right?
Okay, and when push came to shove, he did the hard work. He got what he wanted to do. And okay. You know, when he came into the presidency, we have to remember Jimmy Carter was president right before. He was always mocked by. He was the guy that wore white gloves when he went to work, right. And he worked like 18, 20 hours a day and almost killed himself. Okay, Ronald Reagan came in like a limousine guy, and he said, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. And get to me when I'm having TV dinners with my wife, okay?
Right.
Don't, you know, but, you know, get the job done, okay? That's what he was like, I want results, okay? Yes. I don't care how you do it. This is your mandate, and go and do it. And they did.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a very important part of leadership, which is, you know, you say, you know, yeah, I'm the leader, I'm in charge. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be doing everything myself. You know, I expect, you know, others to be doing the work and then getting, you know, information to me. Carter made the huge mistake that he has got to do all this work himself. And that just leads to demoralization among the staff when the boss is doing everything himself. And there was no real need for this. I mean, you remember that Saturday Night Live sketch, I think, with Dan Aykroyd was playing Jimmy Carter, and he had this kind of, you know, the telephone, you know, Americans can phone in their questions to Jimmy Carter, and then people would sort of phone in, oh, I'm having a problem with my gas boiler. You know, what do I do? Well, what you do is if you go to the button A, you move that, and then, you know, okay. And then every problem under the sun, they called in Jimmy Carter, because basically he got on top of everything, you know, whatever it is, he needed to know all about it. But that's not really leadership. I mean, that's just being a nerd. And that's not what people expect from a president.
And Reagan would say that regularly. You know, they'd say, how many hours do you work a day? It doesn't matter, I'm the boss.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But it's kind of an interesting also that, you know, Reagan, he was much younger, incidentally, than Joe Biden is now. He was older. I mean, he was younger when he left office than Biden was when he entered office. And during, as you remember, Peter, during Reagan's second term, there were real questions about his mental acuity. Now, maybe that was brought on by the assassination attempt, that might have just escalated the dementia that was clearly, you know, already manifesting itself, because he got Alzheimer's soon after that. And so, But again, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we saw the problem with Reagan's second term, and we're seeing the problem with Biden. I mean, that's Biden's first term. So it's like America gets stuck with leaders who really just no longer have the mental wherewithal to do that job.
But the biggest difference is, and when we're comparing Reagan as he was in his decline and Biden is clearly in his decline,
right?
Reagan had fanatics around him.
Yep.
They had people that worshiped the ground he walked on, and they worshiped him when he left the White House. They never abandoned. He wasn't like he's gone. Okay, no. But with Joe Biden, I don't see anybody. This is how we started. I don't see anybody stepping up. Nobody. Harry, I don't want to get involved with the border. That's just a death sentence. Okay.
Right.
If you were in the Reagan administration and the president said, "I want you to take care of the border," you're asking me? Right. Me? Really? Right. Oh my, I mean, there's no comparison here. Yeah. The loyalty to Reagan is something very rare. I don't see any loyalty. It's just lip service. Okay. Yes. I'm sure, Blinken, he said, "Oh, good, there he goes again." Oh.
Yeah. No, there's no question. I mean, there was these fanatics around him, like Ed Meese, and whom he brought over from California, but his hands-off policy did lead him to disaster of Iran-Contra. He wasn't watching the ball, and then you had people like Ollie North just sort of running their own independent foreign policy out of the White House basement. So that could have been very serious for him. I mean, that was potentially quite a serious crisis for him.
It was. I mean, it hurt him politically.
Yes,
definitely. But again, right or wrong, we can get into the minutia. But he was brought up. They asked him questions, and no one wanted to offend Ronald Reagan in public. Absolutely not. That's when we came up. The original phrase, everyone, we use it all the time now. But this is when we came up. How did it go? If he didn't know he was incompetent, and if he did know he was a liar. We came up with that during Iran-Contra. That's how that phrase was invented.
I think that's it. And you're right about the loyalty, because if you remember during the testimony, what did they all testify about? The important thing they all testified about: I never told Reagan. I never told the president. Ambassador Poindexter. He was his national security advisor. Nope, I never discussed it with Reagan.
Everybody was willing to fall on their sword.
Exactly. Yeah, but did you talk? No. So when Reagan said, "Well, I just didn't know. I didn't know," and he's like, "Yeah, that's what everyone said. No, we didn't know." And then you had Schultz and Weinberger, and they was like, "No, well, I didn't even know anything about it." But the people who knew about it all said, "Nope, we just kept it among ourselves. We never talked about it with anyone."
If he did, I just assumed that he did, but I never said anything myself. The presidency is for me, it's always a fascination in the study of leadership. Okay. And that's why I'm fascinated with the Trump administration, because he himself was a leader, but he surrounded him with people that did everything in their power to sabotage him. Right. We never saw that during the Reagan administration. People did take advantage. Ollie North and people like that.
Right. No, I think it's a very strange phenomenon with Trump, that I guess maybe he never really expected to become president. I mean, I think that it really was like a pickup basketball game, the 2016 campaign. It's like, well, okay, hey, let's just keep this going, and then whoa, suddenly, hey, I've just been elected. But for instance, Nixon, he knew that he'd have the entire bureaucracy against him, so he kind of created this phalanx of ferocious loyalists around him. I mean, there's a reason why he chose Haldeman and Ehrlichman, and of course Pat Buchanan and these people. I mean,
what was Colby? What was it? Charles?
Colson.
Colson.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, that guy was a terrorist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So in other words, he knew I would have resistance from the bureaucracy. So I need a kind of a fanatical loyalist around me. You know, their only loyalty is to me. And I mean, that's Trump never had any of that. Now, it may be that now he's thinking in those terms. It's that he's building up. If he's going to have a second term, that he's not going to start appointing all sorts of John Boltons and John Kellys and Rex Tillerson and all of this terrible John Mattis and all of the James Mattis and all that. Maybe he's getting prepared now, but he can't make the same mistakes again. Otherwise, he's heading for catastrophe.
And that's why official Washington, also known as the Swamp, is terrified, because they know that he will learn from his mistakes, and it will be burn it to the ground, because he. Right. Oh, I remember you. Oh, right. I remember you. Right. And you can go work in the forestry department in Alaska. For some reason, if Trump comes back in the presidency, there's going to be a lot of current bureaucrats working in Alaska. Mark my words, okay? Because he can do that. You can't fire them, but you can reassign them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. No, absolutely, exactly.
You're going to see a big change. Mark my words. Okay.
No, I think so. I think so too. I think that's that's his only thing, because if he comes back and then we're gonna have the same thing again, he's gonna all these
Haley and
Nikki Haley and then all these people coming back. And what's the name of that woman, Kristi Noem in South Dakota? I mean, these are people just going to be running. They'll have their own agenda, and they'll cave right away on everything.
Yeah.
All right, Peter.
We're about an hour and a half in here.
Yeah. Okay, Peter. You have any last thoughts to summarize?
What all day long, I thought about the verdict, okay? And I'm glad Kyle Rittenhouse is off. He never should have been on trial before. But the damage that has been done to the civic psyche and all of that is just, I just hope, and hope always dies last, but that's why people should watch George and I. We debunk all of these stories, okay? I'm not going to say George and I were, first in line on the Kyle Rittenhouse story. We weren't, okay? But we do foreign policy for the most part, and a lot of presidential history too, it seems like. But weapons of mass destruction, Russiagate, Bountygate, all of this stuff, they're all fraudulent, and we just saw everyone in on this fraudulent story. Now, this has to tell the powers that be that you have no idea about the condition of people, everyday people, okay, working people. That's what this podcast is all about, is helping the downtrodden punch up, because all the elites, all they know how to do, because they're incompetent, the only thing they know how to do is to punch down. That's their only skill set, skill set.
I agree. And I think that it's also rather scary, because ultimately, it's not just punching down, but it's also using the forces of the state against weak, vulnerable people who you can count will not be able to fight back. I mean, if the government comes after you, you better have a lot of resources to fight back. And they knew that somebody like Kyle just doesn't have those kinds of resources. So whenever you get a win like this, it's refreshing, because I say, hey, it's one thing, you go after O.J. Simpson and he can put together a dream team, but most people can't put together a dream team, and then you can just crush them. I mean, you have to just remember, these prosecutors were trying to put away this kid for the rest of his life. I mean, he was going down for
capital murder,
life. And with no possibility of parole. That's what they were trying to do. They were lying, manipulating the evidence. They were deceiving everybody just in order to get this little kid, into prison for the rest of his life. That's really that's just so disgusting. It's really horrific.
I introduced you to the ruling elites. That's what we do. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right, then. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. It was a lot of fun. Thank you again. We will be here same time next Saturday. So hope to see you then. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.